live once again, joining you on a Thursday evening across Broncos country. It is the Huddle Up Podcast, coming to you live on YouTube, simulcasting as well on Facebook. I'm your host, Chad Jensen. With me, as always, my partner in crime. You know him, you love him, as the lead NFL writer for Heavy.com, columnist at MileHighHuddle.com, Zack Kelberman. Zack, we've got a Thursday, whenever we do the Mile High Mailbag live pods, we're interrupting, if you will, whatever the Thursday night game is going on. Tonight it's the Cowboys and looks like the Bears. Who you got in this one?
I'm going to go with the Cowboys. I'm not a big believer in the Bears this year, Chad. I think they were a lot better last year. I'm not a big believer in Trubisky or whoever they're trotting out a quarterback this week. I think the Cowboys are ticked off enough, and I think they have the talent to win this game, even at Chicago. So I think the offense is going to have a nice game for Dallas. I'm taking them tonight.
A lot of people already hanging out in the room, talking amongst yourselves. We love the community that is growing up around the podcast, both on YouTube, Facebook, wherever people listen to the show. It doesn't make a difference where they listen to the show. We're happy that you're listening to the show, period. And it's especially cool when you hang out with us live and, we can engage with you. And what's up, Travis and Stu and Buona Beast? Your Buona Beast is always one of the first people in the room. Flippant Booch. I'm trying to figure out what that. I mean, I know what flippant means. What's flippant Booch? That's a unique handle you got there.
It's like an old Xbox Live gamer tag.
Yeah. Noble Young, Alicia, Miss Christie. What's going on, everybody? Yeah, we're going to kind of mosey through and talk about some of the storylines that came out of Dove Valley today, specifically with Rich Scangarello addressing what his take, his grade, if you will, on Drew Lock's debut last week against the Chargers. We're going to get to all that here in just a second. First, a couple of quick matters of business. A reminder, make sure you're following the show on Twitter at HuddleUpPod. That's just simply the best way for you to keep your finger on the pulse of what's happening with the show in real time. And then don't forget to take a minute when you get some time, head on over to Apple Podcasts and leave a creative review. And if you like what Zach and I are doing, a 5-star rating on the Huddle Up Podcast, and that kills 2 birds with 1 stone. It enters you into our drawing, our giveaway, which we're going to announce here tonight in just a minute. That we give away some swag, a hat, a shirt, whatever it might be. We randomly select 1 or 2 names from the previous month's reviewers on Apple Podcasts, send you out some swag as a thank you for supporting the show. So it enters you into that, and it's just a phenomenal way for you to organically support the Huddle Up Podcast. So take care of that business. And Zach, while I'm pulling this up, because I do want to announce the winners. We pre-selected them here from the month of November. By the way, these names that we're going to announce is the winners of some swag from our Apple Podcast giveaway for the month of November. If you are the person who left this review, make sure you reach out to us at milehighhuddle@gmail.com and let us know so we can get your personal details and get you out what is coming your way, whether it be a hat, a shirt, and let us know what your shirt size is also, by the way. And here's who won for the month of November. Let me pull out the names here. All right, so there's Rich, 38 years old from SoCal, gave the Huddle Up Podcast a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. He says, great addition to Broncos country. Rich, make sure you reach out to us, milehighhuddle@gmail.com, so we can connect with you on your personal deets. And then also we have to go with AP Blitz, 5-star rating as well on Apple Podcasts. I love you guys. The knowledge and your approach to the game is incredible. Thank you, AP Blitz. Both of you, make sure you reach out to us at Gmail. Zach, it's great seeing the feedback as well that we get from our awesome listeners when they do take some time and review the show on Apple Podcasts.
It is, and it's tough to only pick 2 reviews at a time, Chad. We get so many that come in and so many great, so much support, so many great reviews. We appreciate it, and we see everyone. Nothing goes unnoticed, and we, like always tell you guys, we genuinely are touched by the support.
All right, guys, let's shift gears here. I want to talk about Rich Scangarello because up to this point, we've heard multiple times since Drew Lock debuted against the Chargers last Sunday, we've heard multiple times from Vic Fangio. You can tell he's kind of getting, I wouldn't say necessarily sick of the Lock questions, but already they've worn thin on him. We've heard from him, though, that in his estimation, Drew Lock, he doesn't want to go too far out over his skis trying to compliment the kid that went 18 of 28 for 134 yards, a couple of touchdowns, also an interception. He's trying to keep it realistic, but he has used words like promising and encouraging. especially Vic Fangio, complimented Drew Lock in that he wasn't sure whether or not he was going to be able to show command and poise pre-snap, coming out of the huddle, getting through the plays, commanding it from under center and all that. And he was pleasantly surprised by what he saw from Drew Lock, especially considering, Zach, his 10-week exile, if you will, while he was on injured reserve. Well, Rich Scangarello, we finally get a chance to hear from him today on Thursday. Some of you will be listening to this podcast after the fact. This was Rich Scangarello on Thursday. He said, quote, he's a young quarterback that he turned one over on a play that he had gotten a look at all week, that he expected something to happen. It's live and it's a little bit different, and he kind of got baited. That's something that he's got to bank all in. It's just a comfort, the routine, and the ease of which just playing the game comes from not doing anything for 8 weeks. He was anxious early, to say the least. His pregame routine, all that, it's all foreign to him. Zach, he settled in, though, after the first series, and I thought he showed great poise, close quote, which I think lines up pretty well to what passed the eye test, Zach, as far as you could tell, especially that first series when Locke went 3 and out. He was feeling some jitters, some early game jitters that he overcame, and back-to-back touchdown scoring possessions that ensued following the 3 and out. But your thoughts on Rich Scangarello saying he thought he showed great poise?
I mean, he was pretty much echoing what Elway said in a previous interview about Locke's recognition and the way he was breaking the game down to his coaches and to fellow players. A lot of it is coach speak, and a lot of it they're kind of searching for a positive with Drew Lock's game because, like you said, his stats didn't blow anyone away even though he had the 2 touchdowns. He was inaccurate at first, and he didn't throw for many yards. But what I like about Locke is the same thing that Scangarello likes, same thing that Elway likes. He settled down. He rebounded. It never got too big for him. It never got too much for him. Sometimes it takes quarterbacks years for the game to slow down, but I think we saw it over the course of a quarter, over the course of a play. Locke was getting more comfortable and more familiar as the game went on. So like we always talk about, Chad, you either have that or you don't. That's either built inside of you or it's not. And I think the Broncos are celebrating the fact they finally got a guy that has that quality.
Amen to that. Christy jumping in with the $10 donation Christy on Super Chat, one of our consistent Super Chat superstars, keeping the lights on, keeping us in health and happiness here at the Huddle Up podcast. She says, I'm ready for another win. Could you imagine if Drew Lock wins on the road in Houston, which is extremely unlikely, but if he does, he'll be only the third quarterback in Broncos history ever, the third rookie quarterback to win their first 2 starts. John Elway did it. Can Drew Lock follow suit and match anyway what his boss did? Now, Dylan jumping in as well with a $15 donation on Super Chat. Appreciate you, bro. Happy Thursday, fellas. I wish Elway would go ahead and sign Justin Simmons to an extension already. Also, I'd like to know what's keeping Juwan Winfrey as a healthy scratch. Tackling the last thing he said first, Zach, we touched on this a little bit yesterday, but I really think the biggest reason why you're not seeing Juwan Winfrey hit the field is 2 things. One, the Broncos got Tim Patrick back, and they think quite a lot of Tim Patrick. And 2, coaches just simply don't play rookies unless they have no choice.
Right, and he was always a raw player, even in college, and the Broncos knew that. And like we always talk about, a lot of this Broncos draft class, including Noah Fant, they made those selections for 2020 and beyond. It wasn't necessarily about 2019. So the Broncos are really focused on having Deshaun Hamilton more involved. He was a mid-round draft pick. They like Tim Patrick. They have Courtland Sutton blossoming. They have Phillip Lindsay going. They're getting Locke going. There's only so many reps that can go around, only so many players that can get involved and make a contribution. I think next year when the herd thins out a little bit and they have some continuity with the quarterback and the coaching staff, they'll get Winfrey on the field, see what he can do. He's still a good talent, but he was always going to take some time after the Broncos drafted him.
Very true. And then with Justin Simmons, I mean, we've heard John Elway say it multiple times. Vic Fangio has said that he thinks Simmons has a bright future ahead of him here in Denver. Simmons has been, he's chosen his words carefully when he's spoken on the topic of what his future holds. But it's clear that he would like to stay in Denver if at all possible. It's going to come down to the money. Yep. And the sooner the Broncos can get to that with Justin Simmons, the better. I think the sooner they get to it, Zach, the better the odds are going to be of them being able to lock him down at some kind of maybe not a discount, but a slight team-friendly, nod. But if they let him hit the open market in March, I'm telling you right now, you might as well just franchise tag him if you're going to do that, because there are going to be a ton of teams out there willing to just throw the the checkbook at Justin Simmons.
If they would have re-signed him before the season, the Broncos would have saved themselves some even more money than would have waited now, and he's having a really Pro Bowl type caliber season. But if they signed him now, they would save more, like you said, Chad, if they would have waited until March. So if they just want to get a jump on the things, they can save themselves a few bucks. But I think either way, they're going to have the cap space. They have the desire and they have the talent on both sides to make it happen. They have the inclination. I really do think that no matter what, Simmons will be playing in Denver next year. And he's a type of player, unlike Chris Harris Jr. or Manuel Sanders before he left, he's a type of guy that I think would give the Broncos a little bit of a break. Not too much, but I think a little bit of a hometown discount for taking a chance on him and sticking with him and helping his talent blossom. So either way, he'll be in Denver for the long haul.
I agree. Chris Hernandez, one of our Super Chat superstars. You got a shirt coming your way, by the way, brother. So be checking the mail here in the near future. You might have already gotten it, but if not, keep an eye out. $21 donation. Chris says, dig in the new podcast intro too. Everyone's got to check it out. That's right. We're kind of rotating it in and out. We got the network Overtime Media made us up a new intro for the podcast. And, it's got a few game clips. It even has a Troy Fumagalli sighting clip from his one touchdown reception earlier this year. And then also it's got a funny little Ace Ventura. No, is it Ace? Yeah, it is. But Jim Carrey, nonetheless, talking about exercising the demons. So we're glad that you find that entertaining, Chris. And as always, we appreciate you big time, brother. John jumping in, Houston, with a $5 donation on Super Chat. Also, I found you on Twitter, John. Saw that you followed the podcast on Twitter. So good to connect with you there. He says, I heard that Elway tried to trade back into the first round for Locke. Why do you think he slipped to the second round? He has more talent than Haskins or Jones. We've heard some things. Let me just put it this way without going out on too much of a limb here. John Elway and the Broncos kept a very close and diligent eye on the teams that after they traded back to grab Noah Fant, in between that pick and the Dalton Risner pick, I'm sure there were conversations made with other teams about trading back into the first round. But people keep saying, the Broncos passed on Drew Lock 3 times. And while that's true, because they traded back from 10 to pick 20, that was the first pass. Pick 20 was Noah Fant. That's the second pass. Dalton Risner at pick 41, that's the third pass that people like to reference. But in reality, they only passed on him twice because they ended up taking Dalton Risner at 41 after they already had the trade locked in and done to move up to 42 to grab Lock. If they're unable to get that trade done, Zach, maybe Dalton Risner's not a Bronco and pick 41 ends up being Drew Lock. I don't know. That's we'll never know the exact way that would have shaken out in an alternate football universe. But the bottom line is he's a Bronco. The Broncos viewed him as a top 10 caliber quarterback, a first round talent at worst. So they consider themselves extremely fortunate to get him, Zach, in the second round. Do you agree with John's premise here that he's more talented than Dwayne Haskins and Jones, let's just say from a traits perspective?
I mean, I happen to like Locke in that class more than those other two quarterbacks. It's all about preference. It's such a subjective thing. And even in the NFL, 32 GMs can't come into a consensus. And that's why Locke fell where he did. Look at Tom Brady. The guy was a 6th round draft pick. Sometimes players just slip down the draft board for no possible reason. I am not a Daniel Jones believer. Haskins, I was wavy on. Locke in this quarterback class, I happen to like the most. Maybe that he doesn't agree with that premise, but I don't want to look at hindsight. I think the Broncos made out very well for themselves, and we all forget that Locke in the pre-draft process had a first-round grade, a top 5 grade in some mock drafts. I mean, the guy was rising up draft boards, and I think in another draft, if in certain things broke a different way, I think he would have been in the first round. But I'm not willing to look back. I'm not willing to second-guess the Broncos. They came out of that with a tight end of the future, a perennial Pro Bowl, if not all-pro lineman, and their potential quarterback of the future in the first 3 rounds. So I think the Broncos did pretty well in that haul.
I do as well. I mean, it might not pay the type of immediate dividends that some fans want. The Broncos are going to probably end up with a losing record this year. But come 2020, I'm telling you, we already know what kind of player Dalton Risner is. Noah Fant has already posted an all-time rookie season for Denver Broncos tight end. And Drew Lock, if he can continue to progress and show the promise that he did in that first game, I'm hoping that Scangarello and Vic Fangio will increasingly begin to take the training wheels off because they did, they're extremely conservative with him, especially after they got outside of the scripted portion of Scangarello's game plan. But I mean, I think it's going to continue to pay dividends for this team, but especially it's a future type of deal here. Now, Buona Beast, he hung out in the room early, Zach. Let's get to his question. He says, can you tell us about the center we picked up from the Steelers? Is this to look at a future center in practice in case McGovern is not brought back, or was he picked up for this year's roster? No, Buona Beast, that is definitely a it's a looking ahead type of move. It's hedging their bet type of move in case things don't work out with Connor McGovern in free agency. They acquired Corey Levin, or Levin, however you pronounce his last name. I've heard it both ways. Off waivers from the Tennessee Titans, if you can remember, right after the final roster cutdowns beginning of September. He didn't last too long on the roster before they moved on from him. He might have actually even been signed from someone else. I can't remember now off the top of my head. But anyway, the only other backup interior guy that could possibly fit as a center is Austin Schlottman, but they like him more as a guard. So when they had the opportunity to sign Patrick Morris, who went undrafted out of TCU last year, ended up signing with the Pittsburgh Steelers, where he spent his entire rookie campaign on the practice squad, Zach. But that year, 2018, Patrick Morris was under the wing of Mike Munchak. And of course, we know Munchak now in Denver. As soon as the opportunity arose this year when he hit waivers, the Broncos pounced, and that was the corresponding move when they put Derek Wolfe on IR.
I don't want Broncos fans to look into this move in more ways than one. Obviously, Mike Munchak is not this god, is not this end-all, be-all of coaching, because he would have got a better season, I think, out of Garrett Bowles. And also, this is future contract season. A lot of teams in this month, in December, going into January, they bring in a bunch of players and they sign them to reserve future contracts for next offseason. This is not a guy that's going to be starting. The only thing I will say, though, is if they pick up a center, it would allow the Broncos some flexibility. They can move McGovern back to guard. They can do several things with their backup linemen on the roster, but this is just a bottom of the roster type move. It's an early scouting move for 2020. Do not read too much into this pickup.
Yeah, it's just simply getting a look-see at a player that Munchak had comfortability and familiarity with. And it's a little bit of a preemptive, just-in-case type situation if things go sideways with Connor McGovern. Now, Travis Bruley wants to know what we think about the Broncos drafting a quarterback with the first pick. And, Zach, I am of the opinion at this stage, and I was of the opinion before Locke ever even debuted, but I think the Broncos need to completely take quarterback off the board as a top 3-round option. Maybe if you had the Clemson kid coming out this year, which he's not going to, you consider it. But Drew Lock, he needs a full year, if not more, as the starter with the full faith and support of the organization around him. He is a talented young player from a skill set perspective and traits perspective. Zach, I would concur with the previous comment that, he's arguably the most talented, next to Kyler Murray possibly, in the draft class this past draft, definitely more so than Jones from a toolsy traits perspective, and Haskins. Arm strength, athleticism, he has them both in spades over those two guys. Now, you get into the Kyler Murray weeds, and that's a pretty unique and talented dude, but Locke's up there. I'm telling you, it was more of an anomaly and more of a result of the way the first round unfolded in terms of the quarterback-needy teams getting their quarterback early. And I think some of those teams are going to rue their decision to pass on Drew Lock, because the biggest issue with Locke isn't necessarily does he have the talent, Zach. The question is, does he have the it factor, and does he possess it between the ears? Yeah. We've already seen that he's the antithesis to Paxton Lynch in terms of how he came in and attacked the responsibility of learning the playbook, figuring out life as a pro. He was diligent in that 10-week exile on injured reserve in terms of going through each and every practice twice through virtual reality, keeping his nose in the playbook. I just don't think there's any reason to consider a quarterback high in the draft this year. And I honestly don't, just based on what I've heard and people I've talked to. Zach, I don't think the Broncos are thinking that way at all.
I don't either. And it would have taken Drew Lock absolutely face planting for multiple weeks in a row. I'm talking disastrous outings every single week for the Broncos, I think, to even consider going quarterback with their first pick. They have bigger fish to fry. And I think Lock's that win last week, bought him enough through 2019, and I think enough through 2020. Now, that assuaged a lot of the Broncos' qualms about Drew Lock. So, no, quarterback's not going to be a first pick. And like you said, Chad, I'd be surprised if they picked a quarterback before round 3. If anything, it'll be another Brett Rippon type of developmental guy to throw on the roster. They're always going to have them in excess for Scangarello to develop. You can never have too many, but I don't see a quarterback being a round 1 option. You need a corner, you need linemen, you need a receiver. They have other fish to fry.
Dropped your pocket jumping in with a $15 donation on Super Chat. Appreciate you. Says, finally got to listen to the pod live. Usually I'm at work. Keep up the good work. Yeah, it's great to have you, man. It is great to have you, and glad you can be with us. Christy wants to know if you're feeling better. Zach, you feeling you over the sniffles?
Yeah, I'm feeling. I'm not 100%.
Right,
I'm a little congested, but I'm okay.
People keep wanting to know what's on the dry erase board behind you. Let's just answer the question.
I mean, let's drop the mystery. I did have, because I have to, keep my eye on both teams. It is the Cowboys roster back there, but that's basically all. It's their depth chart, which I've memorized by now.
So. Right. So here's what it is. All right. Most of you have been listening to the show and following what Zach and I do for a long time. Some of you might be new and don't know this story, but Zach and I were together, of course, at Mile High Huddle 24/7 Sports for a couple of years together, basically. And then when 24/7 Sports decided to get out of the NFL business and make 24/7 Sports a 100% college platform, we had to seek opportunities elsewhere. I took Mile High Huddle to Sports Illustrated, and Zach, who, he's still with me on Mile High Huddle. We continue doing the Huddle Up podcast covering the Broncos, but he also took a job as the lead NFL writer for Heavy.com, which includes spending a lot of time covering the Dallas Cowboys, because if you're a lead writer and you're covering the NFL as the lead writer, obviously the Cowboys are one of those teams you got to keep an eye on. So Zach had to do a kind of a crash course, if you will, on learning the Cowboys roster and the whole 9 yards. And that's what you're seeing there behind him. But don't worry, he's still got two eyes on your Denver Broncos. And that's why we're able to drop knowledge with you each and every day here on the podcast. So
2 eyes and a heart right here, all for the Broncos. Do not worry, guys.
Dean says, hey, what's up, guys? Just so you know that you guys are the best, especially in the knowledge you have of the Broncos. Appreciate you, Dean.
Thank you, Dean.
So with Drew Lock in the mix now, where do you see us in the 2020 season after the draft? I mean, Drew looked just phenomenal and elite as a quarterback. What more could you ask for? Go Broncos. Well, I'm not going to say he looked elite. I'll say this. I concur with Vic Fangio and I concur with Scangarello. Encouraging, promising, poised, showed off the arm talent, showed off the athleticism, showed off some command, also made some rookie mistakes. He missed a few reads, missed a few throws with those early game jitters, Zach, through the pick that he knew. Rich Scangarello talked about this, and I've heard it talking to other players this week. We've heard it, that was the play in which Denzel Perryman dropped back and picked off Drew Lock. That was something that they had identified on tape, and he just missed it. He just assumed that he wasn't going to drop to that depth and didn't pay attention, and it was a rookie mistake. And even he talked about that, he's going to learn from that, as Scangarello said today. Got to bank that. But there was a lot of good, absolutely encouraging, but there was also some bad. It was a rookie debut. So we can't get out over our skis. At the very least, Zach, he's a player that you got to be excited to see what the future holds, including all of 2020. If the Denver Broncos do anything to obscure the path for him as being the guy in 2020, it's going to be so irritating to have to cover that and explain that to fans, why they're not just anointing Drew Lock, because at this stage, he is easily the most talented quarterback on this roster. You need to build around him and get into what Dean's saying here, what we see in the 2020 season after the draft. I see, Zach, the Broncos going out in the draft or free agency and building this O-line, continuing to put wood on the fire, if you will, and build that nest around Drew Lock. Go find him a dynamic number 2 wide receiver. Go find the defense some competent corners, so that if Chris Harris ends up being one of those, great. But if not, either way, Bryce Callahan has someone that can hang with him next year, and it's not the weakness that it is this year.
I would consider myself one of the bigger Drew Lock supporters, and I think I'm higher on his ceiling overall with the Broncos than most, but I wouldn't say he was phenomenal or elite in that game. I think he had like Chad said, he was a rookie in a lot of ways, good and bad, and the best word I can label Drew Lock after only one start is promising. But it really speaks to the level of desperation, in a good way, in Broncos country for a franchise quarterback. I mean, fans are thirsting for that guy to step up, and even though he wasn't perfect, fans are still looking at Drew Lock, a guy who made his first start after so many months on the shelf, as phenomenal and elite. I think that's encouraging, and I think it's a good look for the Broncos to finally have that hope back in the fan base of having that guy under center. He can be phenomenal. He can be elite. He has to get there, though. He's far from it right now. He has a lot to work on still, but it's very, very promising.
Dylan jumping in with a $5 donation again, back in with a comment. Build the nest. Amen, brother. Hashtag that. Build the nest. I'm right there with you. And Zach is as well. Let's see what Russell has to say here. What's up with our second halves? Could that be Scangarello, or is this just a byproduct of coming out so fast in the first half? It's honestly, and Elway even complained about this a little bit on Elway Access, that little segment he does every week with Broncos TV that you can find on the team website, also on the team's YouTube channel if you want to go check it out. I make sure to watch it each and every week because it's only one of two opportunities we get each and every week to hear from Elway on the pressing issues of the Denver Broncos. The other one's on KOA radio. So it's appointment watching for me because you want to hear what he has to say. But he brought up, Zach, that, Scangarello is a first-time coordinator. He's done a lot good. We've seen that his offense can work for the Broncos in this league by the way this team has put up points and yards in the first and second quarter, mostly the first quarter, but in the first half, let's just say. But it's all comes back when the Broncos are still on that 15 to 20 play script that Scangarello structures in the game plan ahead of time. Then what happens is once they get through that 15 to 20 plays worth of the script, then it comes down to, as you say, choosing the right play. Play selection becomes an art for coordinators on both sides of the ball. One of the greatest things about Wade Phillips is that he, as a defensive coordinator, it's not exactly apples to apples, but as a play caller on the defensive side of the ball, Zach, he has a phenomenal talent and knack for being able to call the right play in the right moment that's going to get the right result for his team. And that's something that takes time. It takes repetition. It takes, swings at the plate. And Rich Scangarello is still so new on the job as a coordinator in the NFL. It's just taking time. There's an upload process. There's a buffering process. I think it will improve. He just needs to not be so conservative, and he needs to stop calling and designing plays based around fear and base it more around, because human beings are motivated by one of two things. It's either hope of gain or fear of loss. Okay. As a coordinator, Rich Scangarello has telegraphed to all of us, Zach, he is more motivated by fear of loss than he is hope of gain, and he needs to flip that paradigm on its axis.
It's like in the first half of games, he's in the kiddie section of the pool with floaties on his arms, and everything's fine. But when the second half rolls around, the Broncos get punched in their face, they're taken off, and he's thrown into the deep end, and he's just flailing around. That's the best way to describe the Broncos' offense right now in the play calling in the second half. When one thing goes awry, if they lose a lead, if they get a turnover or whatever, it's just they go completely off their game plan. It's like he goes into a shell and he gets scared. He cannot coach like that. So yeah, the second half, I don't put it on the players that are following their play calls. That is all Scangarello, all Fangio being rookie coaches, inexperienced coaches. That will come with experience, the aggression and the confidence. But right now, it's costing the Broncos ball games. Happened in Minnesota. 20-point lead at halftime, and they go into a complete shell like they're up 100 points. Even if you are up 100 points, you always go for the kill shot. You never stop. You never stop until that clock hits 3 zeros. That's what Belichick has done for 20 years. That's why he's winning. You always have to stay aggressive until the game is finally over.
John jumping in with a $5 donation again on Super Chat. John. Appreciate you, bro. He says the only QB Elway would take next year would be Justin Herbert. That's the Oregon quarterback for those who don't know. I think Locke is a better pro prospect than Herbert. Herbert lacks leadership and is inconsistent. I would agree with that. I would take Locke. I mean, let's say Locke came out this year and he's coming out the same year as Herbert. I would be more into Drew Locke as a prospect than Herbert. Have you ever listened to Herbert talk? He sounds like he's 16.
Yeah.
Leadership is an issue. I mean, remember how we've talked about how Locke has the it factor. He's QB1 mentality. I mean, the quintessential example of that, Zach, is when he sat down at the podium at the Senior Bowl and just commanded the room. Like all all media on site in that moment were like, wow, Drew Locke, man, you can tell this is a guy that at least has the charisma and face and ability to lead a franchise and be that guy. And Herbert doesn't have that, Zach. I don't know if you've ever listened to him talk, he seems like he's extremely shy, introverted person. And then that also trickles down to, quarterbacks need to be leaders. And if you're a shy and introverted person, how are you going to lead guys on the field in an extremely competitive, violent, uber passionate endeavor that is the game of football?
It's like I said, it's all subjective when it comes to how you feel about a quarterback stacked up against another. But if I had my way, I would rather the Broncos keep Locke on the roster. They already invested a pick in him, than rather spend another first round pick on a quarterback and go with Herbert. I think Locke has better arm talent. I think he's a better leader, like Chad said. I think he's a better quarterback for what the Broncos want to do and where the game is becoming. There's a lot more, I feel, a lot more bust factor with Herbert in the first round than there is with Locke in the second round.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. I would agree with that 110%. Stu, our super chat superstar,
always.
one of our most consistent supporters, jumping in, $20 donation. Appreciate you, brother. Yeah, so we'll see how it shakes out. I really don't think, though, Zach, the Broncos are strongly considering quarterback in the first round. It would take Locke in these last 4 games. I mean, Nathan Peterman level incompetence. Let's see what else we got here.
Even then, though, I don't really see it happening. It would just
you got to give him the time. Yeah. You have to give him the time to soak it in here. Let's see what Nick says. How did either of you become Bronco fans? Just curious. I was literally shown a photo of all 32 teams, and as a young kid, I chose the Broncos symbol, and from there began growing a love for the game. DB4L, Denver Broncos for life. I mean, for me, honestly, the way the Broncos, my story is going to be a lot more similar to those of you listening and watching the show right now than probably Zach's is. Zach's came from, and I'll let him tell it, but he came from a professional perspective to cover the team. Yeah. And I grew up as a kid kid born in the late 70s, growing up in the 80s, John Elway posters on the wall. That was me. So Denver Broncos have been something I've paid close attention to and been a fan of as a kid, 30-something years. Then I started covering them as, circa 2012-ish and doing what I do now, founded Mile High Huddle in 2014. And it's kind of interesting because I can remember the days still, Zach, when the Broncos were playing, stomach tightened up in knots, anxious, how my rest of my week would go was contingent on, did the Broncos win? Like, that's how important it was to me as a fan, as I'm sure many of you listening right now are nodding your heads. It's the same way. Over time, for me, once it became my job to cover the team and analyze the team and follow each and every storyline and make sense of it all, what does it all mean? The stakes of the games became smaller. It doesn't, for me, it's, my mood and health and happiness doesn't hinge on whether or not the Broncos win. Now, it's always better when they win. I want to see them win. I want to see this team succeed. But one of the coolest moments was seeing them win the Super Bowl with Peyton Manning in 2015. That was just a cool opportunity and something I'll never forget as both a fan and someone covering the teams at.
Yeah, like Chad said, I ended up covering the Broncos 3 years ago now for 24/7 Sports, the now defunct 24/7 Sports NFL department. And that just led me to the Broncos. It led me to Denver. I actually didn't grow up a Broncos fan. I grew up a Jets fan, a diehard Jets fan. And just like Chad was saying, if you are at that level, when you were younger, if they would win or lose, that would dictate how you feel. And one of my first football memories is 98 AFC Championship game, when the Jets were up 10-0 on Denver at half, and then the Broncos came back and won that game. So I was always, from a young age, I guess, intimately familiar with the Broncos, and they kind of just stuck with me over the course of my life.
Yep, and the football fates, the football gods, if you will, brought these two football priests together to do what we do now for you guys here on the Huddle Up Podcast and Mile High Huddle. Keone says, how's it going, guys? Good to see you. How can I donate to the show? If you find it the kindness of your heart to donate to the show, the only way to do it is through YouTube. You got to subscribe to Mile High Huddle on YouTube. Pretty easy to find. And then when we go live like this, there's an option where you can donate on Super Chat. Pretty intuitive. You just got to follow the show on YouTube, follow the channel, I should say, subscribe to Mile High Huddle. And then when we go live, instead of watching it from Facebook, you're watching it from YouTube, and then you can donate as you see fit. We appreciate you even considering it. We'll grab a couple more guys, and then we'll get out of here. I guess, we should probably start turning our attention. We leave the heavy lifting as it relates previewing the upcoming opponent to Nick and Carl on Building the Broncos. They do such a good job on the Scout's Eye preview of breaking down the upcoming opponent, matchups to watch, strengths, weaknesses. But Zach, let's just touch on this for now. How are you feeling about the Broncos going in to an 8-4 Houston Texans team? They lost last year, close game. If McManus hits that final field goal, Broncos beat the Texans last year in Denver. Lots changed since then. New head coach, new quarterback. This time they're going to be on the road, and the Broncos are facing basically the number 9 They're a top 10 offense, mostly top 5 in the key categories. I think they're going to have to put up some points if they even want to come close to winning this one.
Yeah, the Texans are a good team, and they're coming off a big statement win against the Patriots, but that can work against them, too. They can get too big of a head, the Texans. They can read their own press clippings, and they can take the Broncos for granted. That would give the Broncos an in there. I'm not necessarily worried about wins and losses in this game. I want to see Locke's progression. If he can hang with Deshaun Watson, if he can put up some points, even if they lose, that's a win, and that's a positive for Denver. It's going to be tough to upset Houston on the road. Great offense, good defense. They're a playoff caliber team this year, but I just want to see positive, not moral victories, but just progression from Drew Lock in the offense. That would be enough for me, even if the Broncos lose.
Same here. I'm not going to disagree with that one whit. I'll tell you where it's actually becomes intriguing. If the Broncos, because we know they're going to have to put up points. Vic Fangio, he'll confound Deshaun Watson and the Bill O'Brien offense. I don't think they're going to go crazy, and they might come close to scoring their average, which is 24.4, but I'm going to bet they come in just under 24 points. And I think it's because Fangio knows how to get after and confuse young quarterbacks that are still learning how to read a defense. And this is Deshaun Watson's third year, but he still is very much learning as he goes as well, even as great as he is. But here's where it becomes still, they're going to score points. So here's where it becomes compelling, Zach, is Drew Lock's going to have to put up points if he wants to compete in this game. What is he faced with in that department? Well, you're going up against a Houston Texans defense, Zach, currently ranked 27th in total yards, currently ranked 25th in yards per play, currently ranked 17th in points per game. They're giving up almost 23 points per game. Net rushing, they're 19th. Almost every major statistical category defensively, they're in the bottom 5 or the bottom 3rd. So this is even though it's on the road, hostile environment, this is an opportunity for, if you are Rich Scangarello, you're hearing the message from on high from John Elway that we need to do better in the second half. You saw what Drew Lock could do in his debut. Zach, now it's time to open it up, take the training wheels off, let Lock go out and be what he wants to be, spread him out, let him do his thing.
Yeah, I'm not going to talk up the Texans like they're the Ravens. And even if they were the Ravens, no team is unbeatable in the NFL. Any given Sunday can happen. If the Broncos are on top of their game, they can, and they hung with most teams, and they can beat most teams on top of their game. This is a definitely beatable opponent, especially on defense. And that's why I'm saying if Locke can at least hang with Deshaun Watson, they have a chance of pulling out an upset here, but I just want to see some touchdowns. I want to see some progression. And like Chad said, after a little bit of horizontal football, east and west football, I want to see north and south. Throw it downfield, get Courtland Sutton involved, take chances, and score some points. I'd be a happy guy.
All right, guys, one last thing, and then we're going to wish you a good evening, let you get back to watching Thursday Night Football. I am going to show you, I'm going to share a screen with you real quick. What to watch for. And let me see if I can blow this up a little bit. Zach, can you read that on your screen? The Chris Harris Jr. part here on the right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I can.
So here's what to watch for, you guys. Chris Harris Jr. needs one interception to join Mike Harden as the only Broncos with multiple interceptions in 8 consecutive seasons. So that'd be a cool accomplishment for him to achieve. Even if this ends up being his last year in Denver, that'd be cool for him to join Mike Harden. Brandon McManus needs 4 field goals to pass Rich Karlis for 4th all-time in team history. Rich Karlis, of course, was the famous kicker from the 80s who kicked he was a barefoot kicker, basically. Von Miller, if he plays, and it's probably maybe slightly better odds than 50-50 at this stage, but if he does, he needs 1 sack to pass Kevin Carter and Neil Smith, getting into sole possession of 27th place on the NFL's all-time sack list. Needs 2 sacks to pass Elvis Dumervil for 26th place on the NFL's all-time sack list, which is interesting because Elvis, of course, one of his mentors in this league. Justin Simmons needs 2 interceptions, Zach, to tie Steve Atwater, who has 12, for the 3rd most interceptions among Broncos safeties through their first 4 professional seasons. So he's on pace to match easily the best safety in Denver Broncos history, Steve Atwater. And then lastly, Courtland Sutton, the last thing to watch for here, you guys. He needs 4 catches to become the 4th Bronco to reach 100 catches for his career through his first 29 games. The only other receivers to do that, well, not just receivers, Eddie Royal, Brandon Marshall, and running back Glenn Milburn. Sutton also needs 94 receiving yards to become the 3rd Bronco to reach 1,000 receiving yards in a single season by his 2nd year, which has only been done by Brandon Marshall and Lionel Taylor's at.
The only thing I could think of is if Chris Harris Jr. gets this interception, there's going to be no shutting the guy up. He's going to be flexing and bragging and speaking out about it, but it's really not about personal accomplishments to me. I don't really like individual accolades. If the team can win and spring an upset, that would be collectively better for their confidence. But in terms of Drew Lock, you mentioned the only other quarterback to win their first 2 starts was Elway. Is that what you said?
Elway, and I can't remember the other guy's name now off the top of my head. You put me on the spot, Dan.
That's all I want to know about, though. If he can do that, if Locke, that's the only individual record I care about, because this team will go as the quarterback goes. So if anyone's going to get a personal record, I'd prefer it to be Drew Lock in this game.
Guys, it's always so much fun to hang out with you and engage in these conversations in the comment stream. So much to talk about, and it doesn't matter if it's a sleepy Wednesday or a Thursday night. You guys always bring the thunder and make these live podcasts so much fun for Zach and I. But that's got to do it for tonight's episode of the Huddle Up Podcast. As always, make sure you're following the show on Twitter at Huddle Up Pod. Best way to keep your finger on the pulse of the show. You can find my partner, Zack Kelberman, on Twitter at Kelberman NFL, as you can see there. Myself at Chad and Jensen. As always, you can tweet us directly. Use the hashtag #FootballPriests. We're going to see it. Questions, or you can just wait till you get on the stream and ask them directly. We're always going to see it. Massive tip of the cap and a mile-high salute to our Super Chat superstars tonight. You know who you are. We appreciate each and every one of you. It is, we're blown away by your support, and it means the world to both of us. So thank you very much. And Zach, enjoy the rest of tonight's game. We'll see if the Cowboys can do what they can to keep the head coach's job alive for another couple of weeks.
That's going to be a pretty tall task for them, but I will see you Sunday, Chad. Hopefully we have good news for Broncos country after the game.
Yep. So we will be back Sunday for the gut reaction immediately following Broncos Texans. So stay tuned for that. And then also you'll have a fresh episode of Building the Broncos, the Scouts Eye preview, coming to you middle of Friday. You'll have that to listen to on Friday, Saturday. Plus, I'm sure Eric Trickle and Lance Sanderson are cooking up another episode of Dove Valley Deep Divers. So plenty of podcast content coming to you over the next couple of days between now and the game. So look forward to that. For Zach Kelberman, I'm Chad Jensen. Thanks again, guys. We'll talk to you on Sunday.